Hi friends! I am very excited for this video because this is the video I am putting out for COSI, which if you don't know stands for Costube Symposium, and a ton of costuming creators from all over YouTube or Instagram or whatever come together and create a content at the same time. A lot of people will work together on different panels, and there are also challenges and things like that over on Instagram. Unfortunately, because of how busy life has been lately, I haven't been able to be super involved in it, but a huge shout out and thank you to everybody who helped organize. I think this is a really fun event, and I will add a link to the official schedule below if you want to see some of the content from the other creators. So moving on from that, if you are new here because of COSI, welcome. My name is Katie. I'm a seamstress and I make things. If you don't know me, I try to make a lot of my content based on what will make sewing accessible, what will make sewing cheaper. I like to do a lot of thrifting of fabrics. I like to find as cheap or free patterns as possible. And I like to teach little tricks and tips that I've picked up over my sewing career here and there, because I truly believe sewing is something that anyone can do if you just put your mind to it and take things slow and have somebody helping you along. I was fortunate enough to have somebody helping me along in my sewing journey, and I know not everyone has that privilege, so I like to just be as helpful as I can when I can. With that being said, that moves very well into this video because today I am making an 18th century history bounding look with completely free patterns. A few years ago, I think about 3 years ago, I found this amazing 18th century inspired fabric at a thrift store. It wouldn't pass as an actual 18th century gown because it's a motif that would have been used in things like furniture or drapes, but not actually on a dress. But I still love it anyway, and it definitely has that 18th century vibe. So when I bought it, I had planned on using it for an 18th century history bounding dress, and then it just kind of sat in my stash. I wasn't really feeling super inspired with it. I had kind of a vague idea what I wanted to do, but then it just sat there, like a lot of fabric tends to do in my stash. Listen, I'm just saying, buying fabric and actually sewing things out of the fabric are two completely separate hobbies. Anyway, then recently I found the fabric in my stash. I was like, wow, that really is cute. I really should make something out of it. And I was just still wasn't feeling all that inspired by it, but I found this dress. It's Vivienne Westwood. I think it is absolutely gorgeous. And I said, you know what, I think I could work with that. So I was chatting with my friends about it and I sent it in the group chat. I said, I think I'm gonna make this dress. And so he said, you mean the Dita Von Teese dress? And I was like, what are you talking about? Which of course, she is an angel. She looks beautiful and everything. So I was definitely feeling inspired because I have been on kind of a vintage kick lately. With that being said, then I found this free pattern from Mood, which is kind of a faux corset shaped bodice. Mood has a ton of free sewing patterns on their website, a huge size range. They're surprisingly inclusive, so I really love it. I recommend it to people when I can. Sometimes the instructions aren't that detailed, so maybe not the best for a beginner sewist, but I do occasionally sew and then review these free patterns, so maybe that would help. I don't know if there's one you wanted me to take a look at and maybe try to help walk through the instructions. I could do my best. Anyway, so the free pattern I will be using is from Mood. I will link it somewhere. And then the skirt is a very simple 18th century inspired skirt. The cool thing about a lot of historical dress is that it's just cut of squares and rectangles and triangles to try and save as much fabric as possible. So historical dress in some ways is actually very good for someone who's new to sewing to be involved in. I have done a lot of chit-chatting. I'm sure you would rather look at this outfit than me, but I'm very excited to be making something for myself, something that can be incorporated in my day-to-day wardrobe with history bounding. Either I could wear the skirt and corset thingy as separates, or I could wear them together for a more elevated look. I don't know. That's why I like pieces instead of dresses, because you can mix and match. I think they are more versatile in a wardrobe. So let's get started. Alrighty, I am really excited to be starting this project. Here is my fabric. I just pulled it out of the wash. It's huge. It's a duvet cover. It's cotton. I bought it at the thrift store for $5.99. It's king size. I bought it like 3 years ago, so my thrift store has raised their prices a bit since then. But yeah, This is what it looks like. This is what I've got to work with. So I'm gonna use this as the fashion fabric, and then for the lining, I'm gonna take a peek through my stash of sheets. For like white sheets, I use them for mock-ups and stuff like that. And I'm sure I'll find one that won't interact weirdly with this fabric and cause sticking or anything. So that is the plan. We'll see what I can do here. This fabric is really cute. I'm really excited. Hopefully this will go well. So I printed off that pattern from Mood. It's called the Spearmint Corset, and they do make you put in your email to get their free patterns, but honestly, they don't email all that often. I don't find it too annoying, so for me, it's worth it. I am relatively familiar with PDF patterns, so I just taped it, but if you're not, you may want to trim the edges before you tape. Alrighty dighty, I've got the pattern cut out. It was really easy to cut. It's just these 4 pieces and does not look particularly intimidating, so I don't know. I'm really liking this trend of me making easy makes for myself lately. This is the sheet I found to use for the lining. I like to cut things out using a rotary cutter, a rotary mat, and pattern weights. Some people prefer to use pins and scissors. It's personal preference, but that's what I did. And then I went ahead and sewed all of the main seams together. So I've sewn this all together. Instead of pressing these seams open like the instructions say to, for this lining layer, I pressed them all to the back because what I'm gonna do is stitch these down and use them as boning channels, the seam allowances, instead of having to sew in my boning separately. So that's my plan. I'll try this on, see how it looks, add the boning, see how it looks then, and if I like it, then I'll go ahead and make it out of my fashion fabric. At this point of the process, I was feeling a bit like a sack of potatoes, but I was optimistic that adding the boning would make a difference, and I was confident enough with it to go ahead and just move forward. Like I said, I sewed the seam allowance down to create the boning channels. If you're going to use heavy duty zip ties like I did, I would go ahead and make your seam allowance just a tiny bit bigger because I was pushing it. But this is what it looks like, nice and clean. This is boning I had in my stash. It's heavy duty zip ties. I like to use them when it's not something like stays that I really need a ton of support in because they are cheap and plentiful. You can get them in a big pack at Lowe's. I get the extra long kind. I just find it makes it easier. I trim them using toenail clippers. They have not touched my toes. They are just for this purpose, but you know, and I'd make them as rounded as possible. Some of this boning I really had to shimmy in there because my boning channels weren't quite as wide as they probably should have been. You don't want them so wide that your boning is shifting around and rotating and trying to slide all over the place, but I was maybe cutting it a little bit close. After the boning was all in, I tried it on again and felt much less like a potato sack, so we were definitely moving in the right direction and I was confident enough to move forward. I had to cut the seams off the duvets just so I could get everything nice and flat, but that was really easy. I wasn't too particularly fussed with placement of the pattern, other than that I really wanted these two little guys in their boat right front and center. I didn't try pattern matching, I just picked motifs that I liked and tried to make them visible. Ta-da! On these, I did split the seams as per the instructions, just to reduce bulk. This is where I'm stopping for the night. I have to do a Joanne run, so I suppose I'll pick up tomorrow. Okay, this is the one and only place I'm gonna deviate from the pattern. It has you binding the edges and then folding the center back and sewing here. I'm actually going to, before I bind, put these right sides together, sew my seam allowance so that I don't have to finish it like by hand or top stitch later. I'm also going to add another boning channel here just so that the grommets, when I put them in, have a bit more reinforcement. This is what that looks like done. And now when I bind the bottom and the top, everything will just already be finished. Okay, almost to the binding, but before that, I just ran a quick line of stitches around the curved edges here because it will make binding easier. These I didn't just because I figure it's not that curvy, it'll be fine. I'm gonna go ahead and snip these off and then I can start binding. This is the binding color I decided to go with. It's 100% cotton. I was kind of waffling between this and another brighter blue, but I did go with this one. I've already washed it, and now I'm going to cut it into bias strips, and then from there make bias tape. I have made an absolute ton of bias tape. I hope there's enough. I used pretty much all of my fat quarter. I think there's enough, but I did have to alternate using right side and wrong side to get the most out of the fabric. So if your binding has a more obvious right and wrong side than mine does, I would definitely get more than just a fat quarter. And I used a bias tape maker. I love these things. I use them all the time and they're really handy. One more thing. When I made my bias tape, I pressed the back a little longer than the front so that once I stitch this side on right sides together, this back side will be a little easier to catch if I stitch in the ditch, which is my preferred method for finishing. I like to avoid hand sewing whenever possible. As you can see, I sewed that on. A great thing about this pattern is that it doesn't matter how careful you are with these really steep curves here, because it doesn't matter if it's ugly as long as all of the raw edges are enclosed and it's not too bulky, because you're gonna fold it over to insert your hardware anyway. So that is really nice. Saves a bit of time being super careful to make it look nice. This doesn't matter. Good news, the bottom is much easier to bind than the top. At the bottom here, I did essentially a metered corner and I think it looks pretty nice, so I would recommend that. And I also had enough fabric to bind the whole thing out of the fat quarter, but this is all I had left. So especially if you're doing a larger size, for reference, I did the size 18, or if your fabric has a clear right side and wrong side, I would get more than just the fat quarter. But anyway, now it's just to finish up. I think I'm gonna be done for the night, leave it here, move on later. This is the hardware I picked out. I picked black because I thought it was kind of moody and romantic, and I just thought it was fitting, so I think it's gonna look cute. It goes a little not so great with the navy, but I liked it way better than the silver they had in stock, so yeah. I sewed the hardware in by hand just because I thought it would give it a nice clean look, and I didn't really want you to be able to see any top stitching from the front. I wasn't particularly careful though. I'm going to set the grommets now. They placed theirs in the pattern 1.5 inches apart. The pack I bought only came with 8, and I should have thought that through, so I'm gonna do mine a little over 3 inches apart. So unfortunately a little wider space than I would usually like, but it's just a fashion corset, so I think it'll be okay. I can't remember if I mentioned, but on the inside of the back here, I only folded this flap over once because I found if I tried to do it twice like the front, it kind of bunched up a little bit. So the front is folded twice and the back is only folded once. And I feel like I had something else I needed to mention about the grommets. Oh, in hindsight, I'm realizing I probably should have put a strip of interfacing here, and I didn't, but hopefully it'll be okay. If you're making one, I would recommend putting some interfacing where you're gonna put the grommets in. Since my grommets are so big, I did decide to cut into my fabric. I used my teeny tiny scissors just because they're extra sharp, and I cut an X that was just shy of the size that the hole needed to be. And then I used my larger, more heavy-duty scissors to kind of cut that into a diamond shape. From there, I just stretched out the hole with my scissors. You can use a knitting needle, that's what I like to use, and just kind of stretched it until the grommet would fit inside. If you're using smaller grommets, I definitely recommend stretching the holes with an awl or a knitting needle instead of cutting them, but I just did not have the patience to do that with these, so I did cut them. But it is better for the longevity of your garment and your grommets if you can stretch the hole instead of cutting it. For the lacing, I just did a crisscross with a tie-up at the top. I used this satin ribbon that matched the bias binding. I thought the contrast to the white looked nice and still made it cohesive. To finish off the ends of all of the ribbons, I took one end and matched it up to the coordinating end and cut them at the same time just so that they would be at the same angle. So the back ties and the front ties. Then I took some fire and just melted them down a bit so that they wouldn't fray. They're polyester, so this finished it off nice and cleanly, and no one will ever have to know but me. For the skirt, I don't actually have a pattern, but it is very easy. Don't freak out, even if you are a beginner. It's just rectangles. Definitely doable. If you need to pause to go ahead and screenshot or something like that, I would do it now. But the basic idea is we just have the front piece and the back piece. Here's something I just realized I forgot to write down. Hold on one second. Okay, now that I've got that, I will go ahead and explain what this is, because it is, I promise, very simple. First, you're going to decide where you want your skirt to sit. I like it to sit on the smallest part of my waist. Some people prefer to sit it a little lower. That's up to you. Measure that part of your waist and then divide it in half. From there, you're going to add 3 inches, and then you're going to add 1 more inch because we need a ½ inch on each side for our seam allowance. So you're taking your waist measurement, dividing it in 2, and then adding a total of 4 inches for the back waistband. For the front waistband, you're going to take, I talked it all out, half of your waist plus 3 plus 1. So whatever number you just came up with for your back, you're going to add another 3 inches to that because we're going to be creating a dogleg closure to have somewhere to put our buttonhole here. I think it's just a cute touch. It's not necessary, I just think it's cute. So if you wanted to create 2 that were just like this, that's fine. You just wouldn't get this little overlap here. Then what I did, since I was using a duvet I had thrifted, is just took half the width of the duvet. If you're using some other type of fabric or your duvet is a different size, each panel of my fabric ended up being about 48 inches wide. It was a 47-inch panel with a ½ inch on each side for seam allowance. So I had 2 48-inch panels. That's it. That's all you need to cut for the skirt other than interfacing for your waistbands. And the interfacing for the waistbands, you just cut the same exact size as the waistbands. So that's it. That's all the math you have to do. Because these skirt panels, all you're going to do is gather them down to this. I lied. The math. You need to know the width of the waistbands. I like my waistbands to be 1.25 inches wide. Some people like them to be 1.5 inches wide. I find that a bit too bulky for me since I am relatively short-waisted. So I like mine to be just that big. So I will take that, multiply it by 2 because we're going to fold it over, and then add a ½ inch on each side for seam allowance. So a total of 3.5 will be the width. If you want a 1 1/4 inch waistband like mine. If you want it thicker, make it thicker, that's up to you. But that's it. All you need to do is cut 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of fabric plus the interfacing for your waistband. Your math is done. This is what I had forgotten to write down over here. The side seams are going to be sewn together, so back to front and front to back, starting 9 inches down so that you have room to fit your hands in for the pockets, and then you're able to unbutton and take it off without including any type of zipper. We love that. And then for the length, mine was 28 inches plus 2 inches for seam allowance. I am short, but I did also like it kind of below my knees. So length is entirely up to you. This is the measurement I used if you just want numbers to follow. All right, let's make it. Once I had my panels cut out, it was time to start sewing them together, and you can see near the top there, I left 9 inches for where the pockets were gonna go, and just did a few back stitches to make that seam nice and secure so it wouldn't split open, and just sewed right down to the end. For the side seams, I pressed them open and then felled them. I like this finish for this kind of skirt a lot because it's nice and secure, it looks nice from the outside, and your inside isn't going to be fraying at all. It's also nice because you can use the same finish for the bottom of the skirt and the top of the skirt where it splits. You can keep it going all the way through, you don't have to change anything up. So this is what that looks like going from the bottom of the skirt up through the split. Nice and clean. Right where the split for the pockets began, I just did a bar tack, backstitching a few times to make it nice and secure and make it so that it definitely would not split apart if you shoved your hands in your pockets a bit too rough. These are my waistband pieces. Like I said, just rectangles, a piece of cake. I've gone ahead and prepped my waistband, so I'll try and walk you through what I did. First, I put in my fusible interfacing. I like that kind for this kind of project. Then I made sure that the direction of my fabric was facing up and pressed the piece of fabric in half. On the piece that wouldn't be facing up, I did a scant 1/2 inch, the same way I did when making the bias tape so that it'd be easier to catch when stitching in the ditch. Then fold the ends together and stitch right sides together to create a nice boxy end. Clip your seams and press, and there you go, a very nice waistband waiting. I gathered the top lengths for my skirts using a long and loose stitch on my machine from the right side and then pulling them to the length of the waistband. Once I gathered it down, I pinned it in place and sewed it to the waistband right sides together to the part that was not folded under before. Then I pressed the seam allowance up into the waistband, and once it gets covered with the other side and stitched in place, everything will be nice and neat. For the front panels, I left a little room with the dogleg closure, and to finish that off, I just stitched it right sides together and turned it and pressed it before sewing the gathered part in. Like how I finished the bias tape on the bodice, I'm stitching in the ditch here because I don't like to hand sew if I can avoid it. And I'm just pulling on the gathers to make sure that they're facing the right direction before I sew them in place permanently. I created the hem by pressing up a 1/2 inch and then pressing up again 1.5 inches for a nice wide hem, and then I used the blind hemming stitch on my machine. I also put in the buttonholes. Just like pretty much always, I had a hard time picking the buttons. I don't know why, that's my downfall. So I asked Instagram and they picked the blue ones. So we are ready for the reveal. Are you gonna be my companion? Okay, quick little wrap up time. I love this dress. A skirt separate thing. I love it. I think it's very flattering. The only thing I will change before I wear it again is the satin ties that I used kind of slid around and stretched out a little, it seemed like. So by the time I was done, it was a little stretched out, wasn't as flattering. When I first put it on, I had like tied them kind of snug. It's not a real corset top. The boning really isn't enough to pull everything like, you know, but with the little boning it had, it did have quite a bit of shaping. It made my waist look very nice, a great silhouette. But just since the ties stretched out a bit, it got a little loose in the waist. So I think what I'll do is take that satin ribbon out, sew like a channel of maybe like gross green ribbon in it so it's not gonna stretch again, because I did like the look of the satin. So that will take care of that issue. And I kind of tried it out with a few different outfits. For a more fantasy vibe, I just kind of wore it with my shift, and I thought that was super cute. I've worn just the skirt with a white shirt. I thought that was really cute, and of course it's cute as a set. I think maybe even the top with just some like skinny jeans might be cute. I haven't actually tried it yet. We'll see. Yeah, I'm very pleased with that. Thank you for joining me for this video for Quosi. As always, please tag me if you make a set of your own. I would love to see it. If you have any questions about my process, please let me know. I'd love to answer them. And hopefully I will see you for another Quosi video where I will be announcing a very, very exciting project that I've been looking forward to for a very long time. I got kind of last minute called into work, so I'm not entirely sure I'll have it edited in time, but I'm really gonna try. So thank you so much. Again, I will link the videos to the other, Again, I will link the list of the other videos different creators have come out for Quosi, and I will see you next time. Bye, friends. So I'm editing this video, and I forgot to mention I have a ton of this fabric left over, and so I think what I'm going to do with the remainder is, now that I have my kind of more casual everyday version, I am going to go back and make like the Vivienne Westwood version with the super structured bodice and the couture finishing and all that kind of stuff. I probably won't have the motivation to make it until I actually have like a nicer event to wear it to, so if that eventually happens, I will let you know. Come with me. No, don't eat that either. Come with me. Come on. If you're gonna come on. No, don't eat that. Century vibe. So when I bought it, I had planned, wow, I'm talking really fast.